Good morning, debaters, or afternoon, whenever you're watching this. Today, we're going to talk about flowing and keeping track of arguments in debate. I think this is a really important skill, and every debater at every level should be trying to do this. So today, I'm going to talk about the basics of it and also some more in-depth ideas for you to help you be really good at making your arguments and really good at keeping track of your arguments and the other team's arguments so that you can be a really good debater and respond to arguments your opponents made, but also to figure out where your best arguments are based on what the opponent has or hasn't answered. So when we talk about flowing, we talk about tracking arguments in debate. We're going to talk about what is flowing, why you should flow, how to flow, and then how to make arguments in a way that can be easily flowed, which is kind of the most important part of this. So what is flowing? I know this is probably a term you've heard before, but if it's not, that's okay. So flowing is just the term we use in debate for note taking. And it's how we keep track of the important arguments in a debate. So it might just seem like a random term, but actually the reason it's called flowing is because in every debate, there's sort of a flow to the arguments. Like as you go through the hour of the debate, there's things that become important or less important. They change, they move. So it's sort of like, flowing through a stream or flowing through time. Things move and change, and you have to keep track of how they change. So flowing is basically just mapping how those arguments change and what happens in the debate. And we want to note what arguments there are, as well as the authors for them, because in every piece of evidence, there's the tag and then there's the author. And you want to, if you're able to, you want to track down both those pieces because they're both really important to each argument and to the overall story that both teams are trying to tell. Flowing also helps us see what arguments both teams have made, as well as where there's clash in a debate. And clash is basically an idea of like where there's disagreement in a debate. So if you've ever been the negative in a debate, you know that you really don't have time to answer every single one of the affirmative's arguments. You just choose the arguments that you think you need to answer the best, right? So you pick and choose where you want to disagree with them, and where you disagree, that's where there's clash. So flowing is going to help us see where that actual clash is, where the disagreements are, so that we can debate better and have better arguments about where the disagreement is and who's more correct on those questions. So why do we flow? If that's what flowing is, then why do we flow? Well, flowing is actually really important. You need to keep track of your own arguments as well as the opponent's arguments, because let's say you're the affirmative and you read your whole 1AC, right? And then the negative, they just respond to your solvency arguments. That's all they talk about. They read like 4 cards on solvency and they talk a bunch about it. If you're the affirmative in the 2AC, responding to that speech, if you spend a bunch of time talking about inherency and uniqueness and the impact, and you don't spend very much time talking about solvency, then you've given the negative a big advantage, right? Because all they wanted to do was disagree with the solvency, and you basically didn't answer any of their arguments in any depth. So the judge is going to look at their flow, they're going to look at the arguments that are out there, and they're going to say, wow, I think the negative is really winning the argument that the affirmative doesn't solve the problem that they put out there. So I'm going to vote negative at the end of this debate because I know the affirmative doesn't solve their problem. Doesn't matter how big the problem is, doesn't matter if it's unique or not. If the affirmative can't solve it, I'm not voting for the affirmative, right? So if you keep track of your arguments and the opponent's arguments, you'll know where, where you need to spend your time in your debate, and that's the point. Flowing will also help you see where your opponent's arguments are weak and where yours are strong. So if you're looking, if you're trying to tell your story in the rebuttals, you need to have a good sense of where your argument is its strongest and where your opponent's story is its weakest, so that you can compare the two and explain it to the judge and tell them, listen, we solve a really big impact that's going to happen tomorrow. Even if the negative says we can't solve 100% of it, you should still try to do it. You should still pass the plan and see what happens, because otherwise it's going to happen anyway, right? It's very hard to make that argument without having your flow in front of you, your arguments in front of you. and yeah, it helps you tell a story more easily. And also, this is an important point. You want a really broad view of the debate. You want to see everything that's happening in the debate just by looking really quickly at your flow. And I think, in debate, in middle school debate, and also when you watch people in real life debates, like experts who debate on subjects but aren't necessarily debaters, people tend to get caught up in really small issues in the debate, or parts that they think are interesting, or parts that they agree or disagree with the most, and they kind of miss the big picture. So if you've debated before and you've gotten through a debate and a judge makes a decision based on a part of the debate that you didn't really think was important or interesting, that's probably because there was some breakdown in flowing the debate, in making sure you knew where the arguments were in a debate. Because if your flow is really good at the end of the debate and the judge's flow is good, you should both pretty much come to the same conclusion of what happened in that debate, 90% of the time. Obviously, judges are still people. They're going to make decisions that you might not see as reasonable or agree with. But if you're both flowing the arguments, if you're taking them seriously, if you're looking at the whole debate, generally, if you flow every argument in a debate super well and you bring that flow to your coach, or to a really high level debater, with about 99% accuracy, they can predict who won that debate based on the arguments in that flow. That's how important flowing is. And if you're a really good flow, you can sort of tell what's going on in debate, who's winning that debate, just by the flow itself. Okay, so if that's what it is, that's why it's important. How do you do it? Some of you might already have a sheet. I'm going to stop screen sharing so that you can see this a little better. You might already have a sheet that looks like this. It has 7 columns across it, and each column has the name of a speech and the amount of time that speech takes. You'll notice one column actually has 2 speeches in it. That's the negative block, right? So the negative speaks twice in a row, speaks once and then again without the affirmative interrupting them. So that's why there's only 7 columns on this, but normally you would have 8 or 7. Either way is fine. And that way you can track the arguments that happen across the debate and how they show up. If you don't have a sheet like this, that's okay. You can make one. I'll show you how to do that. So if you take a piece of paper, it can be white printer paper like this, or it can be lined paper. Either way is fine, doesn't really matter. And you fold it in half lengthwise one time. Make sure you line it up and get a really nice clean crease on it. Okay, and then we're going to have it still lengthwise. We're going to fold it again. That's 2 total folds. We're doing some origami in class today. All right, 2 total folds. Now do it again, lengthwise again. Hopefully, if your other 2 folds were good, this should line up pretty well. Mine weren't great. Not very good at this. That's fine. It's okay. It's not going to mess things up too bad. Okay, 3 total folds. Make sure you have a nice crease in there. And what you're going to get at the end is a piece of paper with 8 columns on it. And the 8 columns are there because you're going to have 8 speeches that you're going to flow in the debate, right? 1 AC, 1 NC, 2 AC, 2 NC, etc., and your rebuttals. I like to draw lines on my columns when I do it this way and label the speeches just so I can see it a little bit better and I can keep track better. If this is something you want to do, you should go ahead and do this before the debate. You don't want to do this in the debate, and that way you can make sure you have a good flow in front of you for the whole debate. So that's how you get your flow ready. How do you actually flow in the debate? So in the debate, you should have that first column ready, have the 1 AC ready, be listening during the debate, and write down their main arguments. So when they say the plan text, write down generally what the plan text is. You don't have to write down every single word. Obviously, in the year this is created, the plan text is going to be something like, disarm the police. Just write disarm the police. That's fine. Underneath it, they'll have their next main argument, which should be inherency. So I usually write inherency really big, and then I write the idea of the tag. So the tag will probably be something like gun lobbies pay politicians to make sure guns aren't taken away from the police, and then the author. So I would just write gun lobbies, something like that, to get the main idea across, so that when I look back later, I'll know, it'll remind me what that argument is, but I don't need to write out every single word. And then you try to write out the author and the year also. Probably only one piece of inherency. I hope only one piece of inherency, otherwise huge waste of the affirmative's time. Then they'll get to their advantage. So I'll write the advantage really big. It's either gun violence or it's police legitimacy. Write it really big so I can see it in there. And then write, uniqueness, solvency, impact as they get to them. That way, as I go back in the debate, I can see all the major arguments. I can know that they made all the major arguments. And if they didn't make all the major arguments, I'll know that, right? If they forgot to read solvency, or they forgot to read the impact, or if they got to read the plan text, I'll be able to look at my flow and say, oh, they never actually read a plan text. They didn't explain to the judge what they want the judge to do. That seems like a big weakness in their argument. Or they never read solvency, so it's not clear how they actually solve the problem that they bring up. So as the negative, I want to say, they didn't read solvency. They don't actually solve the problem, even if you believe that gun violence is a problem, which, it is, obviously. But if they don't solve it, you can't vote for the affirmative. Something like that, right? Ultimately, it would look something like this. So have like the plan. I don't know, my handwriting is really bad. That's not the point. The point is just this is what it looks like. Then you have inherency, the inherency argument with the author, gun violence, 1, 2, 3, and you can even, write uniqueness, link, impact. But mine's written really big. You can see it takes up the whole column. And the reason you want to do this is because as we get into the other speeches, the other team is going to respond to some of these arguments, right? So you can see on the solvency here in the gun violence advantage, there's 2 turn arguments. The little arrow means a turn. And then there's the text and then the author. I like to put a little X and then the underline, the author's name and then year. That makes it easier for me to go and find it when I'm on my flow. And this way you can see who's actually making which arguments and where they're appearing in the debate. So if I'm the affirmative going into the 2AC, I know that they answered inherency. I need an inherency answer. And I know that they answered solvency because this is my solvency argument and both these arguments come from the solvency. So what didn't they answer? They didn't answer the uniqueness. So I should tell the judge, they didn't answer uniqueness. They agree that gun violence is happening right now. It's a problem. And they didn't answer the impact, which is that there's, 36,000 people are killed by guns every year. So I would extend that also. I'd say gun violence is happening right now, causes 36,000 deaths every year. So if that's the case, all the affirmative needs to prove is that we might potentially solve the problem. So I would extend my piece of solvency evidence. Then I would respond to their 2 arguments. Then I would read some more solvency evidence to prove that we solved the problem, right? And I would also respond to the inherency at some point, either at the beginning or at the end, to make sure to say the plan's not going to be passed. So we have to pass the plan right now and do something about it. That's how flowing can help you tell your story, help figure out what exactly is going on in the debate. At the end of the debate, your flow is probably going to look something like this. You're going to have your initial arguments plus whatever the negative responds to, and then responses as the debate goes on. As you can see, well, first thing that's different about this is the negative is flowed in red. I like to have 2 different colors when I'm flowing, just so I can easily see, okay, negatives in red, they said this, affirmatives in blue, they said this. The content of what's being argued here is not really important. The important part is you can see the affirmative has all these arguments in the beginning, but the negative only responds to a few of them. And as the debate goes on, the negative actually, they're responding to the impact down here. Then they decide it's not really worth it anymore. They start just going deeper and deeper onto one set of arguments, which I think happens to be the uniqueness in here. So as you get in deeper into the debate, you're going to be making less and less broad arguments, but you're going to be focusing on specific arguments and making them deeper. And as you flow those arguments, you're going to know better as the debate goes forward what you're going to actually be arguing. So the way I like to think about it is when you look at it this way, if you look across the board in the flow, you can see less and less arguments happening and arguments getting deeper. I kind of like to think of flowing as like archaeology. So if you're the judge at the end of the debate, looking at the more recent speeches down to the less recent speeches, you can sort of see how this debate evolved and who answered what and who argued what. And as the judge, that's going to give you a good sense of where the major disagreement is and where you should be paying attention in this debate to figure out who actually won this debate or not. If that metaphor doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. It's not that important. The really important part is making sure you flow the arguments so that you know where the important things are in the debate. So how do you actually make, if that's what flowing is, that's how you do it, then how do you make arguments that are actually flowable, where you know your judge is going to be writing them down correctly and you're going to make sure that your story is really clear to them at the end of the debate? First thing is just to be clear when you're reading and speaking, right? And that means speed, not going too fast, not going too slow, and your pronunciation to make sure you're pronouncing things clearly and into your microphone or projecting when you're in person to the judge really well. But also it means being clear about what part of the argument you're on. Are you talking about uniqueness or impact or solvency? It's really just as simple as saying, okay, going on to advantage one on the solvency, we disagree that they solved the problem. Here's our first piece of evidence, like blah, 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 whatever, right? If you just do that, then the judge is going to know, okay, this is a solvency piece of evidence. I need to write it against their solvency evidence, and I'll see who solves the problem better or who doesn't solve the problem. You can also say which argument you're responding to in the same way. And especially for the tag and the author, you want to be super clear and you want to read it out relatively slowly and pronounce it well. So you would say something like solvency. The plan solves the problem because removing guns from officers removes the likelihood that there are any shootings by officers. Kelsey, 2020. If you go that slowly, say it that clearly, your judge has no excuse for not writing it down, right? Something else you can do is try to number your arguments. If you know, let's say you're the 1NC and you're going to answer the impact arguments, and that's all you're going to do, then what you should try to do is number your arguments, right? Say first, this piece of evidence. Second, this piece of evidence. Third, my own logic. Fourth, another piece of logic. Something like that, where you can just go in order. And that way, as you get in through the speeches, you can say, okay, they answered my first and second argument, but they didn't answer my third and fourth ones. And here's what my third and fourth ones say. And since they didn't answer it, judge, you should believe it more because they don't have any response to it. So you should assume that's true unless there's some other reason, some compelling reason why common sense tells you it's not true, right? And if it's an important argument, tell your judge, tell them, you know, here's our main impact argument. You have a moral obligation to stop gun violence because it's so horrendous and bad and traumatic. Judge, I want you to star this argument, underline it, it's important. At the end of the debate, look at this argument first, see if our opponents responded to it. If they didn't, you vote affirmative, right? Tell them it's important. Let them know so that when they write it down, it's going to be big and clear on their flow, and they're going to know that they have to look at this first and they have to take it seriously. So that's what flowing is. That's why flowing is important. I think if you're going to work on any skill in your debates that's going to make you a better debater immediately, it's going to be flowing, because it's something you probably don't have much experience with already, but getting better at it is going to make you a better debater so quickly you won't believe it. Between your first and your third tournament, if you work on flowing, you're going to become such a better debater so much more quickly, because you're going to know where the arguments are, how to explain them, and how they impact the story of what you're doing in the debate. So that's what flowing is. I hope this helped you. I hope that this makes sense. If not, post a comment below. And if you have any other questions, talk to your coach, talk to your peers, and we'll definitely get you some help if you are struggling with this. But remember, like a lot of skills in debate, if this is your first time doing it, you don't have to be perfect right away. Just do your best, try to get better every time, and focus on, you know, making sure that you are trying to get better every single time. And I would suggest sharing your flows with your partner and with your coach at the end of every debate, just so you can see exactly what happened, get their take on it, and see if there's anything you can do better next time. So that's flowing. It's super important. Good luck and have fun debating.